She built a cabin alone while pregnant, the widowed cowboy watching hid a painful past. Emily stood at the edge of the forest, her hands resting on her slightly rounded belly, and took a deep breath. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a scent that reminded her both of home and of the loneliness that had followed her since the accident. Her husband, Michael, had been taken from her too soon, leaving her with no one but memories and the life growing inside her. The pain of his loss was sharp, a constant ache, but Emily knew she could not afford to dwell on grief. She had a child to care for, a life to build, and a future that depended entirely on her strength. The small plot of land she had purchased was rugged and wild, filled with untamed trees, uneven ground, and a river that ran cold and fast. To many, it would have seemed impossible to settle there alone, especially for a woman with a baby on the way. But Emily had never been one to give up. She had grown up on a small farm, helping her father with chores from sunrise to sunset, learning how to plant, build, and work hard. Those lessons had stayed with her, and now they would be her lifeline. On the first day, Emily pulled on her worn boots and set to work. She had no fancy tools, only a few hammers, a hand saw, and a small axe she had borrowed from a neighbor. She measured the ground carefully, marking where the cabin would stand. The sun was high and unforgiving, beating down on her as she dug post holes and chopped wood. Each strike of the axe felt exhausting, but she reminded herself that each swing was a step toward safety and stability for her baby. When she paused to catch her breath, she could see the valley stretching out before her, a wide expanse of green and brown, with the mountains rising in the distance. The sight was both intimidating and beautiful. Days turned into weeks, and Emily fell into a rhythm. She woke with the sun, worked until her body ached, and then rested only long enough to eat a simple meal before starting again. She faced countless challenges: rocks that refused to move, heavy logs that seemed impossible to lift, and nights when the wind howled through the trees, making her feel smaller than she ever had in her life. Sometimes her hands were blistered and raw, her back sore from bending and lifting, but she never allowed herself to quit. She spoke to her baby often, telling him stories of the trees, the river, and the dreams she had for their life together. At night, when the work was done, or when exhaustion forced her to stop, Emily would sit by a small fire she built from the surrounding woods. She would stare into the flames, thinking about Michael and wondering how she could have survived such a loss. There were moments when tears came unbidden, slipping down her cheeks as she whispered to the quiet night, "I'll keep going, I promise, for us." The forest listened silently, offering no words but a steady presence that somehow gave her courage. Despite her determination, the work was not easy. Emily struggled to balance her health, her pregnancy, and the physical demands of building a cabin alone. Some days she had to stop and rest for hours, lying on the ground with her head on her pack, listening to the river rush past. Other days, she miscalculated a beam or a post, forcing her to redo work that had already taken hours. Each mistake was a test of patience, but Emily learned quickly. She adapted, finding new ways to lift logs or brace walls, using ingenuity when strength alone was not enough. One afternoon, as Emily carried a particularly heavy bundle of wood across the uneven ground, she felt a sharp pain in her lower back. She dropped the wood, grimacing, and rested against a tree. Her heart pounded not only from the effort but from the fear that she might have pushed herself too far. She placed a hand gently on her belly and felt the small kick of her baby. That tiny movement reminded her why she had to keep going. She could not allow herself to be defeated, not when someone else's life depended on her. Food and supplies were another challenge. The nearest town was miles away, and Emily could not afford to make frequent trips. She relied on what she could gather from the land: berries, wild vegetables, and fish from the river. She learned to preserve food, drying it in the sun or smoking fish over the fire. Sometimes she bartered with a passing traveler or bought essentials from the general store in the town, saving every coin she could. Each small victory in managing her resources felt monumental, proof that she could survive on her own. Emily's nights were often the hardest. The cold crept into her bones, and the forest seemed alive with sounds that made her heart race. Owls hooting, the wind shaking the branches, and the distant cry of animals. She would huddle in her sleeping bag, holding it tightly around her, imagining the warmth of a family home that she once had. Yet, even in those moments, she refused to feel defeated. She reminded herself that she was stronger than the loneliness, stronger than the pain, and stronger than the hardships of the wilderness. Each night she survived was a promise kept to her unborn child. Occasionally, Emily would notice a figure in the distance, someone watching her from beyond the trees. At first, she was frightened, unsure if it was a neighbor, a traveler, or someone else entirely. She would clutch her small axe and call out, but the figure always disappeared before she could see clearly. She began to wonder if the forest itself had guardians, watching over her in its quiet, mysterious way. The uncertainty made her heart race, but it also reminded her that she was not entirely alone, even if she felt isolated most of the time. As the weeks passed, the frame of the cabin began to take shape. The walls stood tall, the roof slowly rising, and Emily's sense of accomplishment grew. She would step back and admire her work, proud that she had created something from nothing. Each nail she hammered, each log she positioned, was a testament to her resilience and determination. She talked to her baby often while working, imagining the day he would see the cabin completed, a place built entirely by his mother's hands. Emily also found moments of unexpected joy. The river provided fresh water and a place to swim on hot days. Wildflowers bloomed along the path to her cabin, and birds often perched nearby, singing in the mornings. She learned to appreciate these small blessings, finding beauty in the simple rhythms of nature. Even in the midst of hardship, these moments reminded her that life could still hold happiness, even if it was quiet and fragile. There were evenings when Emily felt exhausted beyond measure. She would sit by the fire, cooking a simple meal and letting the smoke curl into the sky. She thought about the life she had lost, the husband she would never see again, and the child she had yet to meet. Tears sometimes blurred her vision, but she refused to give in to despair. She spoke softly to the baby, promising a future filled with love and safety. She imagined the day when the cabin would be complete, a sanctuary for the two of them, and that vision gave her strength to continue. Despite the isolation, Emily never stopped learning. She read old manuals about building, listened to advice from passing travelers, and experimented with different techniques. Each challenge became a lesson, each mistake an opportunity to grow. She became resourceful, using every scrap of wood, every stone, and every tool to its fullest potential. The forest, once overwhelming and intimidating, became a partner in her efforts, offering materials, shelter, and quiet encouragement. By the time the first snow fell, Emily had a cabin that was beginning to take shape, a safe, sturdy place that would soon become her home. The work had been grueling, the nights long and the days exhausting, but she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. The baby inside her kicked with energy, and Emily could feel the life and hope they shared. She realized that, despite the pain and loneliness, she had discovered a strength she never knew she had. As she sat on the edge of the cabin steps, wrapped in a blanket and watching the snow fall gently over the trees, Emily felt a quiet sense of pride. She had faced loss, hardship, and isolation, and she had not been defeated. The road ahead would still be difficult, but she knew she could handle it. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. She whispered to her unborn child, "We will be safe here. We will be happy. I promise." The wind carried her words into the forest, and for the first time, the wilderness felt less like a challenge and more like a home. Emily's story in the mountains had only just begun, but already it was a story of courage, resilience, and determination. She had taken a plot of land and, with nothing but her own hands, begun to build a future. The forest had witnessed her struggles, the river had heard her promises, and the mountains had watched her unwavering resolve. She was not just surviving, she was building a life, one log, one nail, and one heartbeat at a time. Emily continued to work on her cabin, her body growing heavier with each passing week as her pregnancy progressed. The mornings were colder now, with frost lining the edges of the river and sparkling in the first rays of sunlight. She woke earlier than before, feeling that every minute mattered. She chopped wood, carried supplies, and hammered beams into place with a determination that surprised even her. The land was rugged, and every step was a challenge, but Emily's spirit was unyielding. She could feel life moving within her, tiny kicks reminding her of the future she was building, not just for herself, but for the child she would soon hold in her arms. From a distance, someone was watching. Jack, a widowed cowboy, had noticed the woman working tirelessly on her cabin. He had lived in these hills for years, a quiet man who kept to himself. Jack had known loss intimately. Years ago, his wife had perished in a fire that had left him heartbroken and hesitant to let anyone get close again. Since then, he had lived a solitary life, tending to his horses and the small ranch he inherited from his father. Seeing Emily, alone and strong, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt a mixture of admiration, sadness, and a strange longing. Jack began leaving small supplies near Emily's cabin. He would gather firewood, food, or tools and leave them on the edge of the clearing, always remaining unseen. At first, Emily was confused. Who was helping her? The gifts appeared suddenly as if by magic, and she could not find the person responsible. She considered leaving a note, but her pride and independence prevented her from doing so. Instead, she accepted the gifts quietly, using them to ease her work, all the while wondering about the mysterious helper. The days were long and demanding. Emily's body was changing, and some tasks she had once done easily were becoming nearly impossible. She learned to rest strategically, spreading her work across the day and allowing her body to recover. Some nights, she would sit by the small fire she had built outside the cabin, listening to the wind and thinking about what life might be like if someone cared enough to watch over her. She could not know that Jack's careful eyes had been following her for weeks, that every swing of the hammer, every stack of wood, and every breath she took in the cold air had been observed with both concern and admiration. Jack carried his own burden silently. He wanted to approach Emily to offer help openly, but fear held him back. He remembered the pain of losing his wife, the heartbreak of opening his heart only to be left with nothing. He feared that getting involved again would be dangerous, not for him, but for Emily. Still, he could not ignore the pull he felt toward her. Watching her struggle, seeing her determination, and noticing the tender care she gave her unborn child awakened a protective instinct he had long thought lost. Emily began noticing the signs of his presence. Sometimes she would find wood neatly stacked in places she hadn't left it, or food carefully placed near her cabin. A warm blanket might appear beside her fire in the morning, or tools she had borrowed would be returned, cleaned and sharpened. Her curiosity grew, and though she longed to meet the person responsible, she also respected their anonymity. In a way, it felt comforting, knowing that someone was silently supporting her without expecting anything in return. Life in the mountains was harsh, but Emily found moments of unexpected beauty. She would pause while chopping wood to watch the river swirl around rocks, or notice deer grazing in the distance. Birds often perched on tree branches nearby, singing softly, and she took these as small blessings. These moments reminded her that the world, despite its challenges, was still full of wonder and hope. She shared these thoughts with her baby, whispering softly, "See how beautiful it is. One day, you will see it too. The relationship between Emily and the mysterious helper grew silently. While she never saw Jack directly, his presence became a constant in her life. The supplies he left were thoughtful, food she could use, wood for her fire, or tools that made her work easier. Over time, Emily began to feel a strange connection with him, a feeling that someone understood her struggle and quietly wished her well. She imagined what kind of person he might be, picturing a strong, kind, and gentle man who respected her independence but wanted to protect her. One day, a heavy snowstorm hit the mountains. Emily had been working on the roof of her cabin, and the wind began to whip fiercely through the trees. The snow piled up quickly, making the ground slippery and dangerous. She slipped while carrying a bundle of wood and fell hard, hitting her side. Pain shot through her body and she gasped, feeling fear for the first time in weeks. The baby kicked sharply, reminding her of their shared vulnerability. She struggled to stand, knowing that without help, she might not be able to finish the work for the day. It was then that Jack appeared. He had been following the storm from a distance, concerned for her safety. Without hesitation, he helped Emily to her feet, steadying her and ensuring she was not injured. For the first time, she saw him clearly, tall, strong, with weathered hands and kind eyes. Emily's heart raced, a mixture of relief and surprise. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack smiled softly but did not answer immediately. Instead, he helped her carry the wood to the cabin and made sure the fire was safe. Over the following days, their interactions grew slowly. Jack taught Emily ways to lift heavy logs without hurting herself, how to brace the cabin against the snow, and how to make her work more efficient. Emily shared small stories about her husband, Michael, and the dreams she had for her baby. Jack, in turn, shared glimpses of his past, not every painful detail, but enough for Emily to understand the depth of his loss and why he had kept himself apart from others. They bonded over shared experience, their connection growing through trust, care, and understanding. Even with this new connection, Emily remained fiercely independent. She did not want to rely entirely on anyone, not even Jack. She worked hard to complete as much as she could on her own, and Jack respected that. Their partnership was gentle, built on mutual respect rather than dependency. They laughed together when mistakes were made, and they supported one another through the small hardships of mountain life. Over time, Emily began to feel less alone, her heart slowly opening to the idea that trust could exist again. Jack also struggled with his emotions. Seeing Emily care for her baby, hearing her speak with determination and hope, reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he still longed for. He felt the familiar ache of grief, but alongside it was a spark of hope he had not experienced in years. He admired Emily's courage, and though he still feared emotional pain, he began to imagine a future where they might face the hardships of life together. It was a slow, careful process, each small interaction strengthening the bond between them. Winter was harsh, but it also offered moments of quiet reflection. Emily and Jack would sit by the fire inside the cabin, talking softly, watching the flames flicker. They shared their hopes, fears, and dreams. Emily told Jack about her plans for raising her child, teaching him about nature, and building a safe and loving home. Jack spoke of his life on the ranch, his love for the land, and his deep respect for her strength. These conversations built trust and intimacy, creating a foundation for a relationship that was honest, gentle, and healing. Emily began to notice that she was no longer completely alone. The presence of someone who understood her struggles, respected her independence, and quietly offered support made the mountains feel less intimidating. She realized that she did not have to face every challenge entirely by herself. The baby grew stronger within her, kicking with energy, and Emily imagined the day they would step into the finished cabin together. She wanted to create a life full of love, safety, and warmth, one that honored the memory of her husband, but also embraced the possibility of new happiness. Jack, too, began to see possibilities he had thought were gone forever. Emily's courage, kindness, and resilience reminded him that life could still offer joy and connection. He admired her strength, but also longed to be part of the family she was building. The bond they shared was subtle but powerful, built not on grand gestures but on small, consistent acts of care, understanding, and companionship. It was a connection that promised healing for both of them, even in the midst of their individual grief. By the end of winter, Emily's cabin was nearing completion. The walls stood strong, the roof protected against snow, and the fire kept them warm on the coldest nights. She felt proud, not just of the cabin but of herself, the determination, patience, and strength it had taken to get this far. Jack stood beside her one evening, watching the smoke rise from the chimney, and for a moment they simply appreciated the work they had done and the quiet peace of the mountains. They knew challenges were still ahead, but they also knew they could face them together. Emily looked at Jack and smiled, a small, tentative smile that carried gratitude, respect, and perhaps something more. Jack returned the smile, understanding without words the unspoken promise between them. They would face the future side by side, supporting one another, protecting each other, and building a life that honored both the past and the hope for tomorrow. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, bringing warmth and new life to the forest. The snow melted, and the river swelled with the runoff, rushing past Emily's cabin with a lively roar. Birds returned to the trees, their songs brightening the mornings, and wildflowers began to bloom along the riverbank. Emily felt the change in the air, noticing how the days grew longer and how the sunlight warmed her back as she worked. She had made it through the harsh winter with the help of her mysterious companion, Jack, and the cabin now stood nearly complete. The morning started like any other. Emily gathered firewood, checked the water from the river, and prepared a small breakfast of dried fish and berries. Jack had been quietly watching her from a distance, as he often did, before stepping in to help when the work became too heavy. Today, however, Emily felt a need for more guidance. Some of the roof beams had shifted during the winter storms, and she was unsure how to reinforce them properly. She hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the tree line, and almost called out for Jack, though her pride made her resist. Before she could decide, a familiar voice said softly, "You'll want to brace these beams before they get any weaker." Jack stepped from behind the trees, carrying a bundle of tools and a gentle smile. Emily felt a flicker of relief. "Thank you," she said quietly, grateful but still stubborn enough not to ask for too much help. Jack nodded and got to work, demonstrating the correct way to support the beams. Emily watched carefully, taking mental notes so she could manage on her own in the future. The trust between them had grown over the winter, a slow but steady bond that neither of them had expected. As the day went on, they worked side by side. Jack handled the heavy lifting, showing Emily how to use levers and ropes to move logs safely, while Emily focused on precision tasks like nailing boards and measuring spaces. They laughed together when mistakes were made. A log would slip or a nail would bend, but their laughter was soft, warm, and genuine. It was in these moments that the connection between them deepened, a quiet understanding forming without the need for grand declarations. Emily felt safe with him, and Jack admired her strength and determination more with every passing day. During a break, Emily sat on the cabin steps, wiping sweat from her brow, while Jack leaned against a post, watching the river flow. She spoke about her hopes for her child, imagining teaching him to fish in the river, showing him how to plant a small garden, and telling stories of the mountains and the forest. Jack listened quietly, occasionally adding advice or recalling lessons he had learned from years on the land. His presence was steady and reassuring, a calm counterpoint to Emily's nervous energy. For the first time in months, she felt truly understood. Emily shared stories of Michael, her late husband, recounting the dreams they had shared and the life they had planned. She spoke not with sorrow alone, but with a mixture of fond remembrance and determination to honor his memory. Jack, in turn, told her small parts of his own story. He spoke of his wife, the fire that had taken her from him, and the loneliness that had followed. His words were careful, measured, never dwelling too long on pain, but they revealed a vulnerability that Emily could sense and respect. In these moments, the walls around both their hearts began to soften, and a quiet, mutual trust began to grow. One afternoon, Emily noticed a problem with the cabin's foundation. A small section of earth near the back had begun to erode, threatening to shift the posts. Panic flared briefly in her chest, but she quickly took a deep breath. "I can handle this," she murmured to herself. She tried to start moving rocks and soil alone, but the task proved heavier than she expected. Jack appeared again, as if sensing her struggle, and together they worked to reinforce the foundation. He guided her hands, showing how to stack rocks and compact soil so the posts would hold firm. The collaboration felt seamless, and Emily realized she had come to rely on him in ways she had never anticipated. Life in the cabin continued, and with it came small, tender moments that neither Emily nor Jack could ignore. Emily would sometimes catch Jack watching the river, the mountains, or even the cabin itself with a thoughtful expression. When she asked what he was thinking, he would smile gently, saying only, "Just enjoying the view." She understood that he was observing not only the land but also her. There was a quiet admiration in his gaze, a recognition of her strength, courage, and resilience. Emily felt a warmth in her chest, a realization that someone cared deeply for her and the life she was building. The pregnancy progressed, and Emily began to feel the baby move more often. Each kick reminded her of the responsibility she carried, but also of the joy to come. Jack noticed the changes in her carefully, offering help when she struggled with heavy tasks, and ensuring she had warm blankets or extra food. Their bond became one of careful attentiveness and unspoken care. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments in the cabin. Emily taught Jack small domestic tasks he had never learned, while Jack taught Emily more advanced skills for living in the mountains. Together, they were forming a partnership that combined strength, wisdom, and hope. One morning, a small accident brought them even closer. Emily was carrying a bundle of firewood up the slope to the cabin when she slipped on damp soil. She fell hard, twisting her ankle and crying out in pain. Jack was immediately at her side, helping her to sit down and assessing the injury. "You've got to rest," he said firmly but gently. "Let me carry the wood. You focus on staying safe." Emily tried to protest, but she allowed him to take over, realizing that accepting help did not diminish her independence. That moment marked a turning point in their relationship, an acknowledgement that strength sometimes meant knowing when to rely on another. Over the next few weeks, Emily learned to pace herself more carefully. Jack guided her, teaching her how to plan workdays according to her energy levels, how to lift without strain, and how to protect herself from the harsh elements. They began to share evening conversations more openly, discussing dreams for the future, the joys of nature, and the memories that shaped them. Emily spoke about the baby she hoped to raise with love and kindness, while Jack shared insights from his years of ranching, offering practical wisdom and gentle humor. Their companionship became a source of comfort, a steady presence in a world that had once felt overwhelming and lonely. The bond between them was subtle but undeniable. Emily noticed the small gestures, Jack leaving freshly cut firewood neatly stacked, bringing extra food without being asked, or quietly repairing a part of the cabin she had struggled with. She realized that these actions were not simply kindness, they were expressions of care, thoughtfulness, and growing affection. Emily's heart, long guarded against loss and disappointment, began to open. She felt a mixture of relief, warmth, and hope, sensing that the connection they shared could grow into something lasting and meaningful. Jack, too, found himself changed by the presence of Emily and her unborn child. He had spent years avoiding emotional attachments, fearing the pain of loss. But watching Emily's courage, listening to her dreams, and seeing her unwavering determination, he felt a deep admiration and protective instinct. He began to imagine a future he had thought impossible, a life with someone he could trust, care for, and share the beauty of the mountains with. Slowly, carefully, he allowed himself to hope again. The spring weather brought both challenges and blessings. Storms would roll in unexpectedly, requiring Emily and Jack to work together to secure the cabin and protect the land. These moments tested their teamwork, but also strengthened it. They learned to communicate without words, anticipating each other's needs and supporting one another through difficult tasks. There was a rhythm to their work, a quiet harmony born of shared effort, respect, and understanding. It was in these moments that their connection deepened beyond companionship into something resembling family. As the weeks passed, the cabin began to feel more like a home. Emily had added personal touches, a small garden patch for vegetables, a few shelves for books, and a cozy corner with blankets and cushions. Jack admired these details, recognizing the care and thought Emily had poured into creating a safe and welcoming space. Together, they maintained the cabin, repaired small issues, and planned improvements. Their shared labor became an expression of trust and partnership, each step bringing them closer together. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Emily and Jack sat outside the cabin, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The air was still and warm, the forest alive with the gentle sounds of evening. Emily rested her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's movement, and smiled. Jack glanced at her, his eyes soft and full of unspoken understanding. In that quiet moment, there was no need for words. They both knew that they were no longer simply neighbors or companions. They were a team, a family in the making, bound by shared effort, mutual respect, and growing affection. Life was not without its difficulties, but Emily and Jack had discovered the power of trust, kindness, and quiet support. They had learned that resilience did not mean facing hardships alone, and that strength could be shared. Emily's determination and courage inspired Jack, while his steady presence and careful guidance gave her confidence and hope. Together they faced the mountains, the storms, and the challenges of building a life from scratch, proving that even in the face of loss and hardship, connection, trust, and love could bloom. By the end of spring, the cabin was nearly complete, a sturdy, welcoming space that promised safety and comfort. Emily's pregnancy continued to progress smoothly, and she felt increasingly confident in her ability to care for both herself and her baby. Jack had become a constant presence, not just a helper but a friend, mentor, and silent protector. Their bond had grown slowly but surely, a steady foundation for the life they were beginning to imagine together. Emily realized that she no longer feared the future as she once had. The mountains, once intimidating and lonely, now felt alive with possibility. She understood that she could not have built this life alone. Jack's careful guidance, support, and companionship had made the impossible possible. And Jack, for his part, found hope and healing in Emily's courage, seeing in her and her child a chance to embrace life once more. Together, they were forging a new beginning, one filled with determination, trust, and quiet joy. Summer came to the mountains in a blaze of warmth and color. The forest was alive with birdsong, the river sparkled in the sunlight, and the air was fragrant with the scent of wildflowers and fresh pine. Emily stood on the porch of the cabin she had built with her own hands, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. The cabin was sturdy now, every beam, every wall, every corner a testament to months of labor, determination, and unwavering courage. She smiled, knowing that soon her child would have a safe and warm place to call home, a place built with love and care. Jack had been there through every step of the journey, quietly observing, offering guidance when needed, and lending his strength when hers alone was not enough. The bond between them had deepened into something neither had expected, a mix of respect, admiration, and the slow unfolding of affection that came from shared hardship and shared hope. Emily had grown to trust him completely, feeling a sense of safety and comfort in his presence that she had not felt since before Michael's death. And Jack, who had once believed he would never love again, found himself caring for both Emily and the life she carried more than he could have imagined. The days were filled with preparations. Emily spent time tending a small garden she had planted near the cabin, ensuring that there would be fresh vegetables for the months ahead. She also gathered herbs and wild berries, preserving them carefully for future meals. Jack assisted with heavier tasks, building a small fence to keep animals away, repairing a section of the roof damaged during a spring storm, and cutting wood for the winter ahead. They moved together in an unspoken rhythm, each understanding the other's strengths and limits, each anticipating the other's needs. One afternoon, Emily felt the first real signs of labor. A sharp cramp rippled through her body, and she realized that the long-awaited moment had arrived. She called for Jack, who had been outside checking a trap for rabbits. Within moments, he was at her side, calm and steady, guiding her to the cabin and helping her prepare a small, safe space for the delivery. Emily felt a mixture of fear and excitement, but Jack's presence gave her courage. His hands were gentle as he supported her, offering reassurance with quiet words and careful movements. The labor was long and difficult, testing Emily's strength and endurance in ways she had never imagined. Jack remained at her side throughout, fetching water, adjusting blankets, and providing comfort whenever he could. He whispered encouragements, reminded her to breathe, and stayed present even when Emily thought she could not go on. The bond they had formed over months of shared work and quiet companionship now carried them through this most challenging moment. Emily could feel Jack's care surrounding her, a protective presence that made the pain more bearable. Finally, after hours of effort, a tiny cry filled the cabin. Emily held her baby in her arms, tears streaming down her face, feeling an overwhelming rush of love and relief. Jack watched silently, a soft smile on his face, feeling a mixture of joy, pride, and gratitude. The baby was healthy, strong, and perfect, a living testament to Emily's courage and determination. In that moment, the struggles of the past month seemed distant, replaced by a profound sense of hope and fulfillment. Emily named her son Michael, after her late husband, honoring the memory of the man she had loved while embracing the new life she had created. Jack helped prepare a warm bath, bringing water from the river and heating it carefully, ensuring that mother and child were comfortable. They worked together seamlessly, their years of shared effort culminating in this intimate, tender moment. Emily felt a deep gratitude toward Jack, not only for his help during labor, but for the support, understanding, and quiet companionship he had offered since the beginning. Over the following weeks, life settled into a gentle rhythm. Emily cared for Michael with devotion, learning the subtleties of feeding, soothing, and comforting her newborn. Jack remained close, helping with chores, gathering supplies, and ensuring that the cabin and surrounding land were safe and secure. They shared quiet mornings, tending the garden, walking along the river, and watching the seasons shift. The bond between them grew stronger, no longer defined by labor alone but by shared life, shared responsibility, and shared love. Emily marveled at the resilience of life, the way new beginnings could emerge from sorrow and hardship. She often thought about Michael, feeling both loss and gratitude, knowing that his memory had guided her through the darkest moments and inspired her determination to create a life for their child. She also reflected on Jack, recognizing the depth of his care and the strength of his heart. In him, she saw not only a protector and companion but a man capable of love, understanding, and hope. Jack, in turn, found healing in Emily and Michael. The presence of the child brought joy and purpose he had not felt in years, and caring for both mother and baby softened the edges of his grief. He learned to laugh again, to see beauty in the simple moments, and to allow himself to hope for the future. The mountains, once silent witnesses to solitude and loss, now echoed with life, laughter, and the quiet sounds of a family forming. As the months passed, Emily and Jack worked together to improve the cabin and the surrounding land. They built a small stable for a horse Jack had brought, repaired fences, and created a safe play area for Michael. Emily taught Jack small domestic skills, while he continued to share knowledge of the land and survival techniques. Their days were filled with meaningful work, shared effort, and quiet moments of companionship. Each task, each shared responsibility, strengthened their bond and deepened the trust between them. The community around them began to take notice. Neighbors who had once whispered about the brave widow now saw a thriving family, a partnership built on mutual respect, courage, and determination. Emily's story became an inspiration, a testament to resilience, strength, and the power of quiet determination. Jack, who had once avoided contact and intimacy, now found himself accepted and valued, not only by Emily and Michael, but by the small community that had watched their journey unfold. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emily sat on the porch with Michael in her arms, rocking him gently. Jack stood nearby, tending the fire, and glanced at them with a soft expression. Emily looked up and met his eyes, feeling a warmth that went beyond gratitude or friendship. They shared a quiet understanding, an unspoken recognition of the journey they had taken together and the life they had created. It was a moment of peace, contentment, and quiet joy, the culmination of months of struggle, hope, and shared effort. Emily realized that the cabin, once just a shelter, had become a home filled with love, safety, and life. It was a place where dreams could grow, where loss could be honored but not allowed to define the future, and where a family could thrive. Jack, too, recognized that his heart, long closed off by grief, had opened to the possibility of love and connection once more. Together they had faced hardship, danger, and solitude, and together they had built not only a cabin but a life worth living. Summer continued, bringing warmth, growth, and a sense of stability. Emily and Jack worked side by side, caring for Michael, maintaining the cabin, and enjoying the beauty of the mountains. They shared quiet meals, long walks by the river, and evenings by the fire, talking, laughing, and dreaming. The bond between them was strong, built not on grand gestures but on daily acts of care, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. It was a connection that promised hope, joy, and healing for all three of them. Emily often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The months of labor, isolation, and struggle had tested her in ways she had never imagined, but they had also revealed a strength, resilience, and courage she did not know she possessed. She thought of Michael, the husband she had lost, and felt gratitude for the love they had shared and the lessons he had left behind. She also thought of Jack, the man who had entered her life quietly, watched over her, and helped her build a future filled with hope and possibility. Jack, for his part, had discovered the joy of connection, the healing power of shared effort, and the love that could emerge even after great loss. He had learned to trust again, to hope again, and to open his heart. Watching Emily care for Michael, seeing the life they had created together, he realized that sometimes love came quietly, gradually, and unexpectedly. It was not about rushing or grand gestures, but about being present, supportive, and steadfast. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the cabin became a home in every sense of the word. Emily and Jack cared for Michael, nurtured the land, and strengthened their bond through shared work, shared joy, and shared love. They had faced the challenges of life in the mountains and emerged stronger, wiser, and closer than they had ever imagined possible. The hardships of the past had not disappeared, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they had forged a life built on resilience, trust, and hope. Emily often looked out across the valley, her eyes following the river as it wound through the forest, and felt a deep sense of peace. The mountains had witnessed her journey, the river had carried her promises, and the cabin stood as a testament to her courage and determination. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that she and Jack, together with Michael, could face anything. They had built more than a cabin. They had built a family, a home, and a future. Jack stood beside her, his hand brushing against hers, and together they watched the sun sink behind the mountains. In the quiet of the evening, with the forest alive around them and the baby sleeping peacefully in Emily's arms, they felt a profound sense of contentment. Life had tested them, shaped them, and at times threatened to break them, but they had endured. They had built a life together, one filled with love, hope, and quiet joy, a life that would continue to grow and flourish, no matter what the future held. In that moment, Emily realized that strength was not about facing life alone. It was about resilience, courage, and the willingness to trust someone who cared. And Jack realized that love could return, even after loss, and that hope could bloom in the most unexpected places. Together they had created a home, a family, and a life that was beautiful in its simplicity, meaningful in its struggles, and rich with the promise of tomorrow.